Hey everyone, Steve here from Big Head Tech, and I must apologize. This video was supposed to come sooner and unfortunately got delayed because I didn't check the RAM speeds when I was doing some of my testing, and what tipped me off was one result was significantly lower than what the expected results were, and then I had to redo everything from scratch. But today we have overclocking, and I actually overclocked and undervolted at the same time. The RX 5700, the Sapphire Pulse, and the ASRock Challenger. Let's take a look at the test bench. It's my standard test bench, should not surprise anybody. So standard, I only have to look at my notes here. Ryzen 5 3600 ASRock B450 Pro 4 motherboard, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 G-Skill memory, 3600 megahertz at CL19. The GPUs are going to vary. Crucial, we have a Crucial P1 500 gig NVMe SSD with a fresh version of Windows. That's going to be important here. And a 500 gig external SSD by Samsung. And then, of course, be quiet, generously supply three major components. The DarkRock Pro 4, not as major because they're not doing CPU testing. The Silent Base 801, which is definitely a big component. And then they're also powering the whole unit with their Pure Power 11. That's a 600 watt, 80 plus gold certified power supply. And by the way, all three products have been absolutely fantastic. So thank you, Be Quiet, for that. Now, we need to talk about a couple assumptions and then the notes. Notes are going to be pretty important here. So, assumptions. Precision Boost Overdrive's enabled. Pretty much was running 4.2 gigahertz on whatever active thread or threads, because cooling on the CPU wasn't a problem. XMP was enabled. CPU and GPU fans were at default. I just ran what AMD recommended me to run them at. Temperatures were between 23 and 25 degrees ambient, so I'm doing temperatures over ambient. And tests were done at all at 1440p, both the tests themselves and the primary display. The secondary display was at 1080p, and motion blurs off when able. Notes. If you refer to my previous video, even though the Challenger ran a tad worse and a little hotter, I said if we figure out the issue to the black screen, I could recommend it, especially if the Pulse is not available. Well, now my Pulse black screen's on Chrome too. Now, I'm not sure what the issue is. This works fine in my system. This works fine in the test system. Flip-flop, they both black screen on Chrome. So that's why I did a fresh Windows install for this particular set of benchmarks. So this I can now, based on my previous video, still recommend. It did not do as well as the Pulse in thermals or performance, but it did okay, fine in thermals, and performance is pretty good. Keep that in mind. We have stock fan curves based off what AMD recommends. We're using driver 19.8.1, and both of these were set to 1850 on the core within the Wattman. Now, ASRock reported a maximum core speed of 1804 with a maximum memory speed of 930, a maximum voltage of 970 millivolts. GPU did report a smidgen higher than that. We'll cover that at the end. And just a couple things, it was easy to dial in. When I did the auto underfold, it went to 956. And when I went to overclock, it crashed. I opted to 970, and it was fine. And the readings were pretty accurate. GPU-Z and Wattman matched up pretty good. Then the champ, unfortunately, wanted to give me trouble. I crashed 5, 6, 7, 8 times trying to get it dialed in. It recommended me at 967, and it didn't work on the millivolts. I opted to, I think it was 980. Still didn't work. 995. Still didn't work. 1000, like 11 or 12. Still didn't work. Then I backed off the memory, and then that worked. And then I slowly backed it down, and I got down to 980 again, and it didn't work. But 984 is what it settled in at. And there were a lot of false readings in GPU-Z that I could not verify in Wattman. So this one definitely gave me a little bit of trouble. Just keep that in mind when we go to actually get to the conclusion here. 3D Mark Time Spy. Both of them saw an increase. Surprisingly, the Challenger had the biggest increase. We went from 1823 to 82, or 7823 to 8213. So we were almost 400 points there, where we were only maybe 100. We were about a 100-point jump for the Sapphire card. Superposition, another big jump up for both cards, 6974 to 6974 to 7306, and 7009 to 7336. They both more or less increased by about the same. Final Fantasy 14 Shadowbringers, high settings, 1440p. We went from 13979 to 14503 and 14029 to 14500. So a little bit actually leapfrogged, interestingly enough. But games, that's usually what everybody's interested in. Synthetics are perfect world. Mind you, I have my standard testing set up. I have 4 Chrome tabs running, all my resource monitoring. Resource monitoring runs on the synthetics, but for games I have the 4 Chrome tabs, YouTube video playing in the background, etc. So my results might be different than yours, but I do it for my reason. The ASRock actually went from 91 to 95 FPS in F1 2018, whereas the Pulse only went from 91 to 93. Based off of other results, I'm going to say the memory speed had more of a factor than that, than anything else. Now, Ghost Recon Wildlands, we actually saw less of an increase. Went from about 71.5 to 74.5, but we went from 70.75 to 75.5. So this got almost a 5 FPS increase. This only got about a 3. So kind of interesting there. Forza Horizon 4, they both went from 109 to 111 and 112. Very, very, very close. And then the Division 2, we went from 81 and 82 to 85 and 87. So we went up by 4 and 5 FPS respectively. I believe it's the last benchmark, should be a Hitman 2. We went from about 65.35 all the way up to 67 flat here. We had a little bit less of an increase, went from just, wow, we didn't go up by much at all, 65.89 to 66.37. So very minor jump over here. And I think this kind of dictates why. So I mentioned earlier that despite me setting the speeds to 1850, I only got back 1814 or 1816 and 1804 respectively. And that's still a decent increase. So that was like 90, almost 90 FPS there, almost 80 FPS, or almost 80 megahertz there. And this actually went up by a little bit less. But what's interesting is the memory speed obviously is higher, 930 versus 915. And then we reported 976 millivolts versus 987. So this required more to keep the higher clock speeds than this card did. The question is how does that affect thermal performance? And we have the answers here. So in this case, this card is still going to win. We actually went down in thermals by a little bit. The only exception to that is memory temperatures. Everything else either stayed the same or went down. Memory went up by 4 degrees. But here is where we made a little bit of a difference. We dropped a degree in VRM, we dropped 5 degrees on the core, 3 degrees on the memory, and 3 degrees on the hotspot over ambient. So what does all this mean? Well, overclocking these cards, there's not much headroom. AMD only gives you 100 megahertz core and I don't know how much you can say on the memory, 875 to 930, but when you do the multiplication, it might be several hundred megahertz. So there's really not a lot you can do. You can take the power sliders up to 20%. You can max out both the 1850 and 930, and then you can play with the voltage. It's not much you can do. But it's pretty easy. You can pretty much either take it to the max and see if it crashes or not, or slowly bring it up. There's not a lot of headroom. I'm actually going to run an overclock on this going forward in my system. So where we are at here is the thermals are definitely worse than the Pulse. VRM temps were about 10 degrees higher, for example, but the VRM temps are the coldest part. The core temp, 4 degrees warmer. Memory temp actually went lower on the Challenger, and the only thing is the hotspot temp is still like 6 degrees warmer. So even comparing these two when undervolted, this card actually gets a lot closer in thermal performance to this card. And the performance kind of goes back and forth. This one did, I think, win out, sort of. But where we're at now is we definitely are in a situation where both cards are extremely competitive. Sure, the Pulse, in my opinion, is a slightly better card. However, this does have an 8-pin power connector and the drivers are still young, so we don't know how well they're going to scale. But both of them honestly have my recommendation. I am probably going to either continue to use this or sell it to recoup cash, and this will go back to my wife. Either way, either card be perfectly fine for either one of us. So that's kind of my conclusion. Both are good. The Sapphire Pulse still takes the crown, but we definitely have a runner-up in my opinion. So as always, like the video if you liked it, dislike if you disliked, leave a comment, get subscribed, buy these in the links below. And as always, this is Steve from Big Head Tech, and I'll see you later on down the road.